Welcome, NEC fans, to the NEC Overtime Podcast. This is our Made in the NEC series, and we have a special guest today. I'm really excited about this. We have former NEC Commissioner John Iamarino, who's with the league from 1997 to 2006. John, thank you so much for making some time in your schedule to join us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Ron. Good to see you again. Good to talk with you.
Awesome. All right. So, we'll talk about, we've had a long history together, and I want to talk about your time in the NEC, which was really special to me. But let's go back to the beginning first. You grew up in Muncie, New York. So, you're from the area up here in the Northeast. As you were growing up, what role did sports in your life play? And, was there a sport that was your passion growing up?
Well, yeah, I mean, from the time I was old enough to follow sports, I figured I was going to wind up playing shortstop for the Yankees someday. And when that became evident that it wasn't going to happen, I figured the next best thing would be to stay in sports somehow. And so my original thought was to combine an aptitude in journalism with sports. And so I went from college. Worked on a newspaper in White Plains, New York, and then from there got offered an opportunity to interview for a sports information position at Georgetown University. Went down there, interviewed, was able to get the job, and that's how I got into college athletics. And basically, I moved up from sports information field to administration. I joined the Sun Belt Conference in 1984, which is a long time ago now as I think back. But that was my entree into conference work. And then I went from the Sun Belt eventually to the NEC, and then from there finished up at the Southern Conference.
All right, so you zoomed about 25 years in one answer there. So I had some things along the way that I wanted to get to.
Sure,
So
go ahead. Let's review.
when I think it's sometimes, I always appreciated that you were an SID first. So you kind of understood me and that profession. And I think that sometimes those in the communications field feel a little frustrated in their trying to pivot to administration. How hard was that for you to go from the stats guy at one point in your life to being an administrator for the Sun Belt Conference?
Yeah, I distinctly remember the conversation. Vic Bubas was the commissioner at the Sun Belt Conference, former basketball coach at Duke, and he sat down with me, and we had the opening for assistant commissioner. And as you said, I had been doing the stats and doing the publications and promoting the league. And he said, here's an opportunity. Instead of dealing with SIDs and writers and broadcasters, you're going to have to deal with athletic directors and coaches and administrators. But I think you can do it. What do you think? I need to know, because otherwise I've got to hire somebody. And so I thought about it for a couple of days and said, it would be a good opportunity to try something different. I enjoyed publicity. I enjoyed working as a sports information director. One of the things that started to get to me a little was the constant cycle. Certain months of the year, okay, I've got to get the baseball guide ready. I've got to get all the rosters gathered together to include them. Back then we weren't using, I wasn't using the internet or anything like that, but it was a very cyclical existence. And so I thought it would be kind of interesting to try something different, still staying in college athletics. I liked working in a conference, so I wanted to stay there, and I was able to make the transition.
So what was it? There's a big difference between working on campus and working in a conference. You spent 35 years of your career working in conferences. What was it that made that priority for you?
Yeah, everybody I've ever interviewed for a position, I've told there's a big difference between working on a campus and working in a conference office, and some people like it and some don't. I enjoyed the fact that it was more. I felt more like a professional executive, so to speak, because I wasn't walking down the hall talking to coaches, and I wasn't seeing athletes, coming through from the field into the offices. Not that I didn't mind that when I was at Jacksonville and Georgetown, but I just felt it was a different level, and it worked for me. I liked the idea of representing all the teams in the conference. And I didn't need the constant interaction of having to root for one team or getting to know coaches, at one school or certain athletes. So it's not for everybody for sure, but I enjoyed it and I was able to make the transition really without too much trouble.
So from there you spend 13 years in the Sun Belt. Then the NEC opening happens in 1997. What appealed to you about this job, and was being a commissioner your goal at that point?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were two things that really appealed to me about the NEC. Number one was being able to run my own shop, being able to be a commissioner after having a lot of years of dealing with athletic directors towards the end, dealing with presidents, working on budgets, working on championships, promotions, marketing. I must have been the world's worst compliance office. I called the NCAA constantly to get answers, but I didn't get anybody in trouble. But I had experience in a lot of different areas when I was at the Sun Belt. And so I felt like I was ready. So that was number one. Number two was I was really enthused about the idea of going back to the New York area where I grew up. So I interviewed at the Newark Airport Marriott, and I thought I had a good interview, but I wasn't real confident in my chances. So I remember on my way home, I went in one of the gift shops and I bought a little Yankee baseball because I said, who knows when I'll be up in this area again. So I'll buy this now, take it home with me back to Louisiana. And then a couple of days later, I got the call, and I was really thrilled.
So you get hired, and you've told a great story that I've heard. Your first day with the NEC, you get off a plane. What's that first day like, where you're in New York and it all goes down?
Yeah, that was one for the books. A couple of days earlier, we had run our basketball tournament in Little Rock, Arkansas, with the Sun Belt. And so I fly home for a day to Louisiana and then fly up to New York. The championship game was that night. LIU was a mega hot team at that point in the New York papers. They were getting all kinds of attention. I show up, I take a cab to the old Paramount Theater, the Schwartz Center at LIU. And I've got no credentials, and there's a throng of people trying to get in because everybody in Brooklyn, I think, wanted to see that game. I'd never been to Brooklyn before. And so I'm on the edge there of the crowd, and I'm trying to get in. And finally, I see a police officer. I say, I need to get in. I'm supposed to hand out the trophy. I'm the commissioner. And he wasn't buying it. So finally, I think it was Denise Gormley, who worked in the office at the time, happened to be outside, saw me, said, hey, let him in. He's with me. So the officer lets me in. And then some fan says, hey, I'm his assistant. Let me in. And it didn't work. Typical Brooklyn guy trying to get in. But yeah, it was. And then the crowd it was a packed house. The game goes down to the end. LIU wins, going to the NCAAs. Great story for them. The court is swarmed by fans. And just before we start the post-game, the awards ceremony, the president of LIU, David Steinberg, leans over to me and says, you better enjoy this because it'll never get any better for you than it is right now. And I said, yeah, you're right. Nobody's upset with me. Everybody's happy. I'm going to be giving out the trophy. I'm real popular right now.
That's great. That's awesome. All right, so let's go through some of your highlights of your time at the NEC. Of course, the full disclosure is you hired me back in 1998, which is probably your best move. Everybody knows this, right?
Oh, no doubt about
it. Let's talk football first. Football was just started. Your predecessor, Chris Monash, who was the first commissioner, he had started in 1996. You came through it. We were running a D3 model at that point. There was no scholarships or anything. But a couple of years later, you were able to push through like a need-based financial aid component. And then by the time you left, we were hitting 30 athletic scholarships, which was big. How important for you as a commissioner was this? And how did you think it impacted the league moving forward?
Yeah, I was very proud of what we were able to do with football, and we had a lot of help from a lot of different people. I spent a lot of time. I made it a point, like I think almost every commissioner does. I made it a point of trying to get around the league and spend time talking with presidents and chancellors and the athletic directors especially. And the schools that played football, as you well know, football is a very important sport on every campus, no matter what level you're playing on. It's vitally important. And the idea of creating more of a conference brand and perhaps competing, at that time it was a pipe dream, but trying to compete in the NCAA at the time 1AA playoffs was something I thought was valuable to us. So I started by talking to ADs and they expressed the need. And then I had some quiet conversations with a few presidents. One of the other great hires I made, I thought at the NEC was Rochelle Paul, who's now the athletic director at St. Peter's. And she was doing compliance, and she and I talked about how a need-based model might work. And so we talked about it in presidents' meetings, and I do remember the Wagner president at the time, Norman Smith, said, "I don't want to hear this subject ever again." He was not in favor of it. But his colleagues were at least willing to listen to it. And I think they recognized the importance of football as a motivator to get male students on their campuses. And so eventually, with Rochelle's help, we were able to put together a model that the presidents approved. And it was a great thrill to be able to get that done. And I remember a few years after I had left the league, I watched on ESPN, I think, Wagner beat Colgate in the playoffs, and I was very proud of that because it kind of brought the whole thing round for me. Another moment that I distinctly remember was the first football game we had on the MSG networks. I think it was out of Stony Brook. I'm not sure. But that was another momentous occasion because we really did want to make football as important to the conference as it was on the campuses.
Absolutely. A good segue, by the way, to MSG. So I want to talk a little bit about TV. You really championed our TV package for basketball, especially. I think when you started it, it was a 12-game package, and we ratcheted that thing up to 30 games while you were there, and it's continued strong, to this day. Why at that time was being on, especially on regional TV in all our markets, why was that so important to you?
Well, I mean, at that time, television was starting to burst. I mean, the number of available networks and regional sports networks were especially popular. And I always felt like if we could associate with the Madison Square Garden network, which at the time carried the Yankees and the Knicks and the Rangers, that was good company to be in. So, we worked by contacting people at MSG. I got to know Jerry Passaro, who was the director of programming, very well. And we were honest. We knew that he would tell us the ratings are not out of this world, but they're significant and it's a local product. And so we also were able to get the cooperation of the schools that were not in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area, and make them understand, hey, we'll get everybody on the package, but Robert Morris may not be on as many times as Wagner or LIU. And I think they understood that and they were willing to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that was really, really helped us is that we essentially on our own went out and put together a syndication package, took our games to what's now AT&T Sportsnet in Pittsburgh and to Masson and to Comcast and to Nesson. And other mid-majors I don't think there was no ESPN3 at the time. They weren't getting the reach that we were getting. So the bang for our buck when we do a game that featured LIU and Robert Morris, and we're getting it on in multiple markets, I thought was really good for the time.
Yeah, it was a significant step, and it's something that, it took a lot of work. Chris had got it started, but we were able to expand on it, and I do think it helped brand the NEC as a more progressive conference
Agreed.
in that part of the country.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing now even is that it's so funny that we started out on the regionals, then everybody sort of migrated to the ESPN model, and everybody's all in. And we never went that way. Once we started our own digital network, we wanted to keep control of a lot of our rights, and our fans love NEC Front Row. And while we do have a contract with ESPN, in the last couple of years, we've noticed that the regional carriers were really hurting for content, that there was this market of this, they had so many openings that they were willing to take our games also. So we've kind of gone back, put our games simultaneously on ESPN3 and regional. So now we're sort of getting the Iamarino model is sort of back in a way, and we're still getting on ESPN, and we're still keeping all those games on Front Row. So our exposure is probably as good as it's ever been. But you started this all like over 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I think what you and Noreen have done with the NEC coverage has been terrific, and Front Row has been very successful and is well done. I've watched it. Yeah, I think the conference has done a good job of building on that foundation.
Let's talk about some of the talent that that you hired. You have your Dave Popkin still with us, Tim Capstraw still with us, Terry O'Connor still with us. This pains me to say, but even Paul Dottino is still with us at this point. All talent that you yourself hired. Who knew, right?
Yeah, I'm sure you may remember this. I can't remember if you were with us or not, but you've probably heard. I probably told you 100 times, but I'm at the very first media day that we set up was at the Meadowlands Basketball Media Day. This was in the fall, I guess, of 1997. And we hired somebody from ESPN to host it. And I don't remember the gentleman's name, but at the end of the event, which went pretty well, we had a pretty good turnout. At the end of the event, I'm just on my way out the door, and this fella rushes up to me and says, "When are we going to do a radio package? When are we going to do a radio package?" And he's like going a mile a minute, and I don't know who he is. And so finally he introduces himself, and of course it was Paul Dottino. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'll just get rid of this guy. I'm on my way out. But I took his card, and he followed up with phone calls. And you may or may not remember this, but we actually did a radio game of the week on the internet. Yeah. And we hired Paul to do that. And then when we decided we needed a sideline reporter for our basketball games and football games on MSG, he was the one that we hired. And I remember I remember Jerry Passaro, who I mentioned from MSG, the programming director. He told me one time, he said, "That Dottino guy's got a lot of enthusiasm. You need to make sure he's contained." But Paul has stayed in touch with me every year. He sends me, hasn't done it this year, but I think that's understandable with COVID. He's always sent me a Giants media guide because he works, obviously, does a lot of media content for the New York Giants. And he's been true blue and loyal to the Northeast Conference ever since then.
Yeah, he's a handful, but we love him, right?
Exactly.
Let's talk about some of the other, like, we were able to attract some pretty big name talent to work our games back then. We had Steve Albert coming in and doing games. Remember, we had Gail Goodrich for a little bit. We had Bill Daughtry came in, Brian Mahoney. Do you think, was it your intent at the time to, like, that these announcers would give us really like an air of credibility on our MSG package that people were watching?
Yeah, I think that was a big part of it. I think MSG itself liked the idea of some big names. You know, Brian Mahoney had no experience as a broadcaster, but he had been the St. John's basketball coach and he was with Carnesecca for all those years. So, you know, MSG loved that. So I think what we tried to do was to get some people, some talent with some weight who could then respond and help us to say, hey, this is a pretty good league. Basketball's pretty good in this league, and they play a good game.
We even, along with those, we helped drive the careers of Matt Devlin. He worked with us. He's the Raptors play-by-play. Kevin Connors started with us. I think right when you were leaving, he was starting with us, and he's an ESPN's anchor now, and has been great to us ever since. So it's a good launch point, the conference.
Yeah, and that's one thing I have been proud of in my career was people like you that I hired in the office, but some of the broadcasters and talent that I've had 3 or 4 people that we hired down here when I was at the Southern Conference, and they're all working for ESPN. A young lady who we hired as our sideline reporter a couple of years ago for our basketball tournament. I watched her the other night. She did a late night ESPN game from BYU. So yeah, it's people always need those opportunities, and if you can give somebody who's got talent an opportunity, has always made me feel good.
That's great. Let's talk a little about Tim Capstraw and holding court for a second. So I interviewed Capper a couple of weeks ago. So we had a future podcast coming with him. We must have talked for 10 minutes about holding court. So I'm in the midst of digitizing some of the old ones. We're going to be putting them out, some best of stuff.
I want to see that DVD.
He actually made a tape a number of years ago that I've digitized, and I'm going through some of the old VHS tapes that we had in the office and getting them so we can put them up. One of the things we talked about was it was pretty revolutionary for the time, and you supported our creativity in this. And for those who don't know, it was a halftime segment that would air during our basketball games, where Tim would take one player from each team, and he would do his best to really, let their personality shine. But a lot of times in the end, it was the self-deprecating humor was to make Tim look bad at the end, and Tim to make fun of himself. And we had so much fun with the players, but some of the ideas really were bad. Like some of them weren't very good. They weren't all home runs, but then some of them were tremendous, and we got noticed because of it. And we talked about Tim and I, the Survivor segment that we taped at Wagner, which Survivor was red hot at the time, and we had 3 players in there doing, like a Survivor type contest. What do you remember about holding court, and why do you think that it was so successful for us?
Yeah, well, I think the reason it was successful was you, because you basically took care of that whole baby. And I always wanted us. I never thought that we'd have success at the NEC or at the SoCon either, for that matter, doing cookie cutter stuff that the bigger conferences do. You had to try different things, and you had to try and be creative. So on our broadcast, as an example, and I didn't think of all these things, but I was supportive of them. If you remember, we had a 60-second to tip clock that would show up at the beginning of the games. And so whereas in most games you watch, there's 5 minutes of the 2 analysts talking about who's going to need to rebound to win the game, that kind of stuff. We would get started playing within a minute because we didn't want to lose the audience, and we wanted them to say, hey, let's start watching right away. That was one example. Holding court was another. I remember one time, I don't remember where it was, but the 2 players were in their chairs, and we waited about 10, 15 seconds, and Tim wasn't in there. And finally, he races in off from left stage and, plops down in the chair and says, oh, that traffic on the Garden State Parkway is a killer, something like that. And it was just a funny way to start. And yeah, he did a great job. I remember I was on the court trying to think of something clever to say to him after he got beat in his last game at Wagner. I think he missed making the tournament. And it was kind of apparent that they were going to make a change in the coaching ranks. So it was Tim's last game as a coach, and I was about to leave and just trying to think of something to say. And he was very gracious and talked to me, didn't get upset about the officiating or anything like that. He probably knew what was coming. But then when we started thinking about who would be a good analyst, his name came to mind right away.
Absolutely. He did a great job with that. So, yeah, it's one of my fondest memories, working with Tim each week, putting that together. All right, let's move on to Trenton. Trenton,
Yes.
we have to talk about it. So I always say we've tried everything once in the NEC. Every format known to man has been used. You can argue against it for 10 years, and then we'll do it eventually.
True.
Trenton was it. So for 2 years, for people who don't know, we moved our basketball tournament from campus to what was then I don't even know what it's called now, the Mercer County Arena in Trenton.
Yeah, I think at the time we played there, I think it was called the Sovereign Bank Arena.
Sovereign Bank Arena. That's right. That's right. And it had literally just opened. We were the first
Just opened.
basketball games there. So we were there in 2000, and then during the fake storm of the century in 2001. We play at home sites now, and it's very popular. And I don't think there's support for ever changing that. But I still get asked questions, and people who have been around talk about Trenton to me every once in a while, and they kind of look back at it as a fond memory. It wasn't as fond to me at times because it was so difficult to administer. But in your memory, what drove the move, and where did it go right, and where did it go wrong for us?
Yeah, I mean that's a great topic. That's one I lost to the conference membership. They clearly wanted to reward teams who finished higher in the standings with home games, and they were just not willing to buy into traveling to one site. And I understand that, and it's been a good model for the NEC. But as you said earlier, we did try almost everything at least once, all kinds of formats. And so we wanted to give a neutral court, it's kind of centrally located, a shot. And we cut the agreement with the arena in Trenton, which, as you said, was brand new. We were going to be the first major sporting event held in there. And so, in 2000, we hired a young lady down there in the Trenton area, and she didn't sell a whole lot of tickets, but we tried our best. We played some of the games. We played the men's and the women's tournaments together. We played some of the games at Monmouth. I remember the very first games, I was at Monmouth, and you and Andy were at the arena, and I know that was a nightmare, I'm sure, but I remember Central Connecticut winning the championship on that court the first year. The second year is the one I remember the best, and you alluded to part of it. We thought we would do better the second year, and then I remember, I think it was Friday evening. I can't remember what round that was, but I know the tournament was going to finish on a Monday, I think. But Friday evening, after a long day of playing there, I go back to the hotel. We were staying across the river in Pennsylvania. And I get back and I flip on the Weather Channel, and they show a regional map, and all it is white. And they were predicting like 2 feet of snow for the area where we were going to be. And for the next 48 hours, that's all we thought about was, what are we going to do if we get this monster storm that's supposed to completely wipe out the Northeast? And I was on the phone with the folks at Monmouth when it came down to Monmouth and St. Francis for the men's championship, St. Francis of Brooklyn. And, I was on the phone with the coaches saying, hey, if you want, we can house your players here overnight after Sunday night to stay in the arena. We can give them this club suites. They can bed down there because we don't know if you're going to be able to go back and forth. And I remember Dave Calloway at Monmouth wanted no part of that. He wanted to sleep in his own bed. So they went back and forth to Monmouth. And St. Francis wound up not staying either. But the storm did not materialize, thank God. We did get, a couple of inches and some ice, I think. So we wound up playing the men's championship game that evening. in front of less than 1,000 people. I mean, we were way ahead of our time. We were socially distancing way back then. And so, there's less than 1,000 people in the building. St. Francis has never won the conference. I think that's still true.
True.
They take a 20-point lead in the second half, and it looks like it's over. There's maybe 12 minutes to go in the game. And Monmouth puts together this monster rally and winds up winning the game. It was one of the more memorable games that I remember from all the tournaments I attended at the NEC. And unfortunately, a lot of people didn't see it because people were spooked by the weather forecast. And, it turned out to be in some ways a memorable night, and in others, a kind of a what might have been moment.
Yeah, I'll never forget it. It was memorable is a good way to put it. I'm glad we gave it a shot though. Like it's good that we tried it. I don't know. In the end, maybe it's. I guess it's hard. It's hard. We weren't exactly in the center of our footprint. Like we were, but we weren't. We were because we were in New Jersey, but we weren't really near any of our schools. So but the 2001 was just impossible to draw anybody. And you're right, it does look like our COVID arenas right now.
Yes.
But it was fun. Let's talk a little bit about. You mentioned it before about the Internet Game of the Week, the Yahoo broadcast Internet Game of the Week. You're a little ahead of your time here. Like we were doing that in 2000. We put football game on, and we had Matt Snell from the Jets,
yes,
with Paul Dottino in the booth. Talk about progressive. That was pretty progressive for the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I do distinctly remember being in a meeting with the athletic directors and the ADs talking about this, and saying though, that I had listened to a couple of Major League Baseball games on this one channel. It was the one started by Mark Cuban, and I can't think of the.
It's like broadcast.com, I think.
Broadcast.com, exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah, and so you were starting to see more and more of this content on the internet that you could listen to for free. And I said, why don't we take advantage of that? And it got to the point, I remember, where certain SIDs would start calling the office saying, hey, put us on that game. So people were listening. A few people were anyway. But as I said earlier, I always felt like we ought to be creative. We ought to take some chances. You could see that the internet wasn't going to go away. It was for real, and it was going to have an impact. I'd be lying if I said I knew it was going to have the impact it does today, obviously. But back then, we were able to do that, and there were other conferences that kind of followed our lead in trying to get their content out on broadcast.com and other internet carriers.
So let's move on to some of the other things that you accomplished at the NEC. You added 4 sports when you were there. We added field hockey, women's golf, women's lacrosse, women's swimming and diving. We took some of our championships. We took baseball. We went to the Sandcastle in Atlantic City. I mean, we were at various different stadiums. Track went down to PG County. Tennis went to Mercer County Park under your watch. How important was it for you as a commissioner to not only expand sports sponsorship, but to improve the student athlete championship experience?
Yeah, well, I've one of the things that I tried real hard to do, no matter where I was in any of the 3 conferences, was to get to know the coaches and perhaps some of the athletes from all the sports, not just football and basketball. Certainly, those are the breadwinners, and I think intelligent coaches at our campuses, at all campuses, understand that the football program is not treated the same way as the field hockey program, as an example. But I always wanted to get to know all the coaches and to give them the best experience we possibly could. I was at an NCAA meeting one time when Dick Schultz, who at the time was the president of the NCAA, made a statement that really resonated with me. And he said that 96% of Division I athletes never compete in an NCAA championship. And I thought that was an astoundingly high percentage. But then when I got back home and to the office and started to put a pencil to paper, I realized, yeah, he's right. So what I always wanted to do was to make the NEC championship the best experience we could, so that it felt like a major tournament experience for the athletes, most of whom were not going to compete in an NCAA tournament. And so, we tried to, my first year at the NEC, we played our tennis championships at a dilapidated hotel up in the Catskills, the Concord.
I
And
was there for one of those.
yeah, that was when you go through that and you see what the athletes have to put up with. I mean, they were good about it, but it wasn't a great sight. So you start looking around, and we were able to find better neutral options in some cases. I thought what we did with baseball was good, going to nice minor league ballparks rather than playing on somebody's home field, which would have been, I guess, the next option. So I always felt like I had a pretty good rapport with the non-revenue coaches. I tried to talk to athletes and get to know them when I had opportunities to see what mattered to them. And I think a good championship experience was high on their list.
I remember you were such a good championship rep that you chased down soccer balls in Johnstown, PA one year, and we had to
That's
move it
right.
out of Loretto in a snowstorm.
Yeah, I was so cold at that game. I've told this to numerous conference people. The coldest I've ever been at a championship has always been soccer, not football, which people might think, but always soccer, because you're outdoors and it's usually in late November and it's usually cold. So I distinctly remember that we were supposed to be playing in Loretto. The field was not playable. It was mud and just deep water standing. We looked around. There was an artificial turf field that they were able to secure for us in Johnstown. And yeah, just to make sure that the game would come off smoothly, I volunteered to go chase some of the balls.
See, other duties is assigned, Commish, right
That's
there.
That's it. We've over the years we've squeegeed tennis courts. We've pulled tarp at baseball fields. You do what you have to do.
Absolutely. So when you arrived, a couple of months after you arrived, you flipped the logo to the more modern design from the old one. Was that, I can't even remember, was that something that you initiated, or was that already in the works when you got there?
That was in the works, and it was just a matter of selecting which one. When I started, there were exactly 5 people working in the office. We had a 5-man staff. And so there was one time there early on, there was a meeting. We were at a hotel, and I think there were concurrent meetings taking place, the ADs by themselves and the presidents by themselves. And of course, the commissioner in that situation always has to be with the presidents. So I was in that room, and the ADs were needing, for a variety of reasons, we were needing a decision on the logo. So I'm meeting out in the hall, I think with Denise, and we down to 2 selections that we liked, and that's how scientific it was. And I said, let's go with this one. And she said, all right, I'll let the ADs know this is the one we're going to do. And that's how it got selected. I don't think anybody ever knew that story, but it was basically her and me making the ultimate decision. Today you'd probably have a 3-person committee, culling down the options, and then you'd have to take it to the membership. Back in those days, it was a little cleaner and a little simpler, but looking at it on your shirt there, it's still a good looking logo.
So there's the story. John Iamarino iron fisted the logo through the membership back in 1997. Now we've modernized it.
Yeah, I know it's been revamped. I got to tell you, I did not like the previous logo that was in place. I always thought it looked like, the Chinese type letters, the old NEC. I just didn't think it was a very good logo.
No, it wasn't. So yeah. All right. So let's talk. You mentioned, this went through at a meeting. I was talking to Andy Alia again. He's been with the league 20 plus years, just like me. we were talking about the Hall of Famers that we had sort of on the administrative side of things in the boardroom. So during meetings, you have Don Cook, AD at Sacred Heart,
Yes.
who's a Hall of Famer in this conference, John Suarez from LIU, Marilyn McNeil from Monmouth, Bob Krimmel from St. Francis University, Jack McDonald from Quinnipiac,
Yeah.
CJ Jones from Central Connecticut, another NEC Hall of Famer. And when I look back on those meetings, they were contentious at times, but there was always a great mutual respect in the room, lots of ideas, some good, some not so good. But in the end, by the time night came and everybody was sitting around, everybody's at the hotel bar or wherever, reminiscing and sharing friendship, even though they were arguing with each other 3 hours earlier. And I always thought that was great. What was that group like to you, and how did they help you get your agenda done as a commissioner?
Yeah, I think you make a very good point. Is they did not look at things always the same way. Even Quinnipiac and Sacred Heart, two private schools, not very far apart in Connecticut. They had vastly different perspectives on certain things, but you made it work because they knew that for their institution to succeed, the NEC needed to succeed. And I've always said that's the number one job priority of a commissioner, is to build consensus. A lot of people may look at certain conferences like the NEC and say, well, mostly private schools, I'm sure they all think alike, it's easy to get things done. We know that's not true, because everybody has their own agenda. Athletic directors are looking out for what's best for them first, and the conference maybe second or third. I always told my staff, I probably told you 100 times, we're the only ones that really care about the Northeast Conference all the time, because we're the only ones that work on it all the time. The ADs and the presidents think about conference matters a handful of times a year, to be bluntly honest. And that's to be expected. They have to be focused on their own institutions most of the time. But the conference office presents the challenge of trying to build consensus among what can be a very diverse group at times.